This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome to our Second Baptist Church noonday Bible study. Today we're going to be studying Mark chapter 8, verses 11 through 21. I'd like to ask us to pray and then we'll get into our study. Thank you, God, for all who've joined us today for Bible study. Thank you for your word and your reminder for us to be plugged into your priorities, for us to be focused on what you are doing and not to get caught up in sideline issues. In Jesus' name, we ask you to bless our time together. Amen. All
Amen.
right. So we've got the discussion questions set up. I'm going to walk us through the discussion questions first. Then we'll do a teach through of the lesson, and then we'll get into um, our lesson text. So question one, and I'm just kind of previewing these. Question one, why did the Pharisees come together to question Jesus? What did this indicate? Uh, Question two, what was meant by a sign? What were the Pharisees after? Question three, go back and skim Mark chapter 1 through 8. What kind of things had Jesus done to authenticate his message? Uh, he had already proven some things. Question four, what did Jesus' sigh indicate? And based upon your answer to question three, why did he sigh? What did that sigh mean in the text? We'll talk about that a little bit. Question five, go back and read Mark chapter 7, verse 24 through 30. What did bread represent in the passage? What does bread represent? Question six, what was Jesus trying to warn the disciples about in verse 15? And how did they misunderstand? And then question seven, what was the leaven of the Pharisees? He warns them about the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod. Question eight, what does the disciples' discussion? They get into an argument about something in verse 16. What does their discussion teach us about them? Question nine, why does Jesus rebuke the disciples in verses 17 through 21? And then question 10, what is the Lord teaching his disciples and us in this passage? All right. So just a quick reminder from our website, if you go to the commitment tab, click on Bible study, scroll down, you'll see all the Bible studies that we've done, all the teaching that's been going on. Click on the Gospel of Mark, and then under the Gospel of Mark, today we are on chapter 8, verses 11 through 21. And when you click on that, it will show you the lesson notes. The lesson notes contain the questions that we just read, as well as a link to where the notes come from. The notes that we're using to study for our Bible study come from Plano Bible Chapel.org. Constable's Notes. These are the 2022 edition of Dr. Constable's Notes on Mark. And if you click that link, it will take you to Dr. Constable's Expository Bible Study Notes. And if you scroll down to Mark and click, it will open those notes for you. And we are in Mark chapter 8, verses 11 through 12. Now, we've put a shortcut for you on our website page that will take you directly to pages 172 to 176. When you click, it will take you to his notes, and then you scroll down and it will tell you what pages you need to go to. And our lesson today comes from pages 176 to 172. And so if you have not already studied Dr. Constable's notes, let me encourage you, download a copy, because that's where our discussion will come from. It will come from these notes on chapter 8, verses 11 through uh, 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 mm,
21.
thank you, 11 through 21. And these are the study notes that we're using to help us orient ourselves to what's happening in the text. All right. So let's get then into the text and read it. Remember that our primary book is the Bible. Our primary lesson material is the Bible. And so let's get then into Mark chapter 8, verses 11 through 21. We'll read that text. I'll do a little teach through. And before we get to that point, is there anybody that wants a particular discussion question? You've already studied it, you're ready to answer it. And the reason we do that is so that everybody gets a chance to participate. So Mark chapter 8, verses 11 through 21. Of the discussion
I want
questions,
question
are there
five. I want question five.
five? Mel, you're going to answer question five. Okay, Sister Melody has got question five. All right. Anybody else want dibs on a particular question before we get to them? All right. I know that many of you group leaders have met with your group, and so you are already prepared for these questions. I'll come back to you after we read the text. Okay. All right. Mark chapter 8, verses 11, verse 1 through 11. No, that's not correct. Verses 11 through 21. Pharisees came and began to argue with him, demanding of him a sign from heaven to test him. Sighing deeply in his spirit, he said, "Why does this generation demand a sign? Truly, I tell you, no sign will be given to this generation." Then he left them, got back into the boat, went to the other side. The disciples had forgotten to take bread and had only one loaf with them in the boat. Then he gave them strict orders. "Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." They were discussing among themselves that they did not have any bread. Aware of this, he said to them, "Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Don't you understand or comprehend? Do you have hardened hearts? Do you have eyes and not see? Do you have ears and not hear? And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many baskets full of leftovers did you collect?" 12, they told him. "When I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many baskets full of pieces did you collect?" 7, they said. And he said to them, "Don't you understand yet?" All right. So that's our text today. Jesus is trying to teach a particular thing to his disciples, and they are not quite getting it. One more opportunity to grab discussion questions. Anybody want to choose any particular questions before we
I'll
dive
take
in?
number number 4.
4, Sister Ashford. Okay.
I'll take number 1.
Number 1, Sister Foster. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay, has 1. And then Sister Ashford Wilson has 4. Okay. All right. Anybody else want dibs? Okay. All right. Let's get into it then. All right. So in this particular pericope, there's one key concept that Jesus wants his disciples to know. That is that he wants them to understand who he is, that he is the Messiah, and that has particular implications for how he prioritizes what he does. And their priorities need to line up with his. Okay. Um, um, so the Pharisees come in opposition of Jesus and begin to argue with him. They want a sign from heaven. Matthew notes that the Sadducees and Pharisees come together. They want confirmation from Jesus about who he is. In order to even ask that question, that's an indication that they were not paying attention to what he had done. And Mark chapters 1 through 8 detail all that Jesus had done to show them who he was. Should have been obvious. Okay. They wanted a sign, and that word sign means a particular thing. And
Nothing.
Jesus, since you still unmuted, that sign, that word sign means that they were not plugged into what Jesus is doing. Jesus responds to their desire for further proof emotionally in a way, but he is also responding to their unbelief. Okay. He's already showed them who he is. And so as he leaves with his disciples who are focusing on the physical, he gives them a spiritual lesson using an illustration that they should be familiar with. However, they get lost in the illustration because they have misplaced priorities. And I want to warn us about something. You might want to write this down. As believers in Jesus, there is always a temptation to be focused on the physical and miss the spiritual significance of what God is doing. There's always a tendency and a temptation to be focused on the physical and miss the spiritual significance of what the Lord is doing and teaching us through his word. And that's where the disciples are. Okay. And so Jesus is trying to illustrate, teach, demonstrate. He's saying it with words. He's teaching it with word pictures. He's demonstrating it by what he does with his life, that he wants them to understand who he is and that what they need comes from him. Okay. All right. So that's kind of a teach through of the lesson. Anybody have questions about what we just taught, about what's in the meat of the lesson?
Pastor, not that, but I think I'll take a stab at question 8.
8. Okay, Sister Argo is going to take 8. Okay. All right.
I'll take 9.
9, Brother Murphy. Okay. All right. Thank you, Brother Murphy. All right. Well, let's get into our discussion questions a little bit. I like to use this format to help us. And I think that it reflects what Jesus is doing with his disciples. So question 1 is Sister Foster. Go ahead. Sister Foster, you there? We seem to have lost her. Are you still there, sister? Okay. I'll read the question and we'll let somebody else take a stab at it. Maybe she can jump back in. We seem to have lost our audio. Question 1. Why did the Pharisees come together to question Jesus? What did this indicate? Sister Foster, are you back? Sister, go ahead. Sister Foster, go ahead. Unmute yourself, sis.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, we got you.
Okay, sorry, my phone was acting up. I have, hold on, I'm sorry. The Pharisees, they came together to question Jesus. They did this to indicate that they wanted to know if he had the authority and confirmation from the divine, and was he trustworthy. And they followed him, and were arguing that wasn't so.
All right. So they're questioning him, they're arguing with him, they are in opposition to him. They want to know, do you have divine authority to do the things that you're doing? Okay. Let's follow up with the B clause of that question. What does this indicate?
Let me see. Excuse me. Well, that it indicates that he is he does perform miracles from his divine power. And They
I
didn't.
mean,
They just
what
none of
does
them.
their question? Yeah, you're getting it. What does their question indicate?
Hold on, I got that written on another spot. Um,
Okay,
That's
the
Sister
outward.
Lewis, so just to let you know.
I see it. Thank you, Red.
Phone is
We just
just.
lost. Okay. Sister Leisha had a question. I'm going to come back to you. Go ahead.
Um, I started thinking about when I saw that if Jesus also questioned their faith.
Mm, okay. So their opposition to him is an indication that they don't believe. They are questioning him because they lack the faith to believe what's going on. Okay. All right. Thank you. Nice tag team. Let's go to question 2. What was meant by a sign? What were the Pharisees after? What's the word sign mean? Or semeion in the Greek?
They wanted an outward compelling proof of his divine authority, according to Constables, and a confirmation or authentication of his ministry. And they were actually hoping to expose Jesus as a phony.
Mm.
And they were trying to reveal something about his true character at that point.
All right. Thank you, Sister Watson. They're looking for the opportunity to embarrass, humiliate, say that Jesus is a fraud. They want an outward sign, some authenticating thing that he will do for them to prove that he is who he says he is. What are they reaching back for from the Old Testament? What are they reaching back for from the Old Testament?
Pastor, I believe they were looking for signs like Jesus had done during Moses' time for the children of Israel.
All right. They're looking for the Mosaic signs. And what types of things did Moses do to show the children of Israel that he was who he said he was, that he was the God called leader of Israel? There were 2 signs
Well,
the Lord gave him.
the plagues in Egypt and
All right.
um, the parting of the Red Sea.
All right. So let's
And
back up a little bit. Let's back up
let's
a
go
little
a
bit
bit further back.
historically. Prior to the plagues, prior to the Red Sea, God gives Moses 2 signs for the children of Israel to know that God has sent him. Uh, um, does anybody remember what those were?
Was that the burning bush?
After the burning bush, these happened after the burning bush. Uh,
Was it when he
so let me
turned the, I'm sorry.
go ahead, Sister Cheryl.
Was it when he turned the rod into a snake? Was that one of them?
Yes, yes. So Exodus 4, when he turns the rod into the snake, throws down his staff, it turns into a snake, reaches down, grabs it by the tail, picks it back up, it turns into a rod again. Okay. The second sign that he gives him is that Moses sticks his hand inside of his shirt or his garment. When he pulls it out, it looks like it has leprosy. When he sticks it back in, it turns back normal. Okay. And then the third sign in Exodus chapter 4 as well is that Moses would take water from the Nile and pour it out on the ground and it would turn into blood. So God gives Moses 3 signs that authenticate who he is. Okay. So the Israelites, the Pharisees are wanting Jesus to do something in front of them that will show them who he is. But there's a problem with that. Okay, so let's get to question 3. When we go back and we skim Mark chapter 1 through 8, what kinds of things had Jesus already done to authenticate his message? What kind of
He
things had he already done?
he healed the sick. I have them all listed, but
Okay, go ahead.
he
Go ahead.
okay. He rebuked the man with the unclean spirit and cured him. He healed Simon's mother-in-law of a fever. He healed the man with leprosy. He healed a paralyzed man. He cured the man with the shriveled hand. He calmed the wind and waves of the sea. He cured legion of the demonic spirits inside him. He healed Jairus's daughter. He cured the woman with the issue of bleeding. He walked on water. And of course, he fed 4,000 and 5,000 people in separate times.
All right. What else do you want him to do? Okay, let's go back and grab one more from Mark chapter 1. Okay, Mark chapter 1, verse 11. Oops, help if I could type, wasn't it? Mark chapter 1, verse 9. In those days, Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee, was baptized in the Jordan by John. As soon as he came up out of the water, he saw the heavens being torn open, Spirit descending on him like a dove, and a voice said, "You are my beloved Son. With you I'm well pleased." And then all the authenticating miracles that Sister Cheryl just mentioned all take place. Mark 1:21 drives out the unclean spirit, heals people, cleanses a leper. She just read all of these. So as we go through Mark, from Mark chapter 1 to Mark chapter 8, Jesus is authenticating the message with the use of miracles, okay? Which makes their question completely inappropriate. So what Sister Cheryl Ashford Wilson has question 4. Go ahead.
Okay. What did his sigh indicate? And based on the answers to question 3, why did he sigh? But it says that he sighed deeply, and that he was really grieved in his spirit and disappointed with the apostles, because they had walked with him. They had seen the things that he had done, the miracles that he performed, and he was just hurt that they didn't believe after all that he was God. And he thought they should be more responsive to him because of the fact that they had seen all this. And then he just decided, enough. If you don't believe me with this, no more signs. That's it.
All right. So who is it that's requesting this sign?
It's the apostles and, well, his disciples. I put it that way, his disciples and the Pharisees.
Okay,
Those
so
Pharisees.
primarily there is disappointment with the disciples because they're not getting it yet. But
Right,
it
but the
is the
Pharisees.
Pharisees that are requesting the sign. Okay, so I wanna take us somewhere with this real quick. This is my prayer journal. I write down in it what I'm praying about. Okay, write down in it what I'm praying about. Recently, the Lord answered one of the prayers in my prayer journal in a major way. And I was convicted after he answered, because the question should be, you shouldn't have any doubt now about what I'm able to do because I've shown you. And so for how many of us can we recount moments in our lives when we knew that was the Lord? I didn't fix that. God fixed that for me. Okay. God delivered me. God delivered my child. God answered this thing that I was praying about. God gave me the strength to get over. I know that wasn't me. I know that was him. Okay. Plus, we have the authentication of his word to show us. And so one of the things that we're wrestling with in this, one of the tensions in this text is, will we believe him based upon what he says because of what he's already done? Okay. All right. Question number 5. Mel has this question. You still on? I think we might have lost Mel. Sister, you still there? Okay. Maybe she got busy with something else. All right. Question 5. Go back and read Mark 7:24 through 30. What did bread represent in this passage? When we go back and read the previous pericope, what did bread represent in the story about the lady with the demon-possessed daughter, Syrophoenician woman? What does bread represent in that passage? Somebody help us out.
The leavened bread metaphorically represented teaching, Jesus
Right?
teaching. And
Okay.
she was saying that the Gentiles didn't need to wait to receive Jesus' blessing until a later time. They could feed when the children, well, the Jews did, and namely during Jesus' ministry.
Okay. So it represents the teaching ministry of Jesus. It represents his truth. Is there anything else that we see in there? All right, I want to add something to that. It does represent his teaching, but it also represents, and write this down, his gracious disposition toward believers. His gracious disposition toward believers. Okay? God is not neutral when it comes to us. He is for us. I think we need to recognize that. He's not neutral. He is for us. And so the bread represents his provision, his gracious disposition toward us, but it does represent his teaching as well. Okay. All right. That's important because question 6 says, what was Jesus trying to warn the disciples about in verse 15, and how did they misunderstand? So let's go to verse 15. He warns them about something. What is he warning them about?
He
He was
says,
warning
take
them about.
heed. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
Keep
Alicia.
going.
He says, and he charged them, saying, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the leaven of Herod. Um, and I thought the leaven would represent, it talks about the old and maybe the the tricks and schemes and the evil of the Pharisees and Herod.
Okay. Okay. So Herod and the Pharisees have something in common. And leaven, the thing that they have in common is that leaven represents their, or yeast. And let me ask you a question. How many of you have ever baked bread before? And when you bake bread and you put the yeast in, what does it do? Go ahead. You can.
The
You don't have to raise
rise.
your hand. You can just. It rises.
Rise.
Why does the bread rise? Because the yeast has done what? Sister Cheryl Asher Wilson, unmute yourself and come on and talk to me. I can see you talking, but I can't hear you.
I don't know if I have the right answer, but it arenates it. It gives it the ability to rise. The
Okay.
ingredients mix together and it rises.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. It aerates the dough. The reason it aerates the dough is because the yeast spreads through the dough. As it multiplies, it gives off carbon dioxide gas, and that's what causes the bread to rise. So yeast multiplies throughout the whole lump of dough, and that's what causes it to rise. Then when you push it down again, it keeps on multiplying and it rises a second time. That's because the yeast has multiplied throughout the whole lump of bread. That's how we get bread. That's how we have the little holes in the bread, because the yeast has spread throughout it, which is a living organism, by the way. So the yeast activated causes the bread to rise because it has spread. So what Jesus is warning them about is that the pervasive influence of the Pharisees, which is disbelief and doubt, they should be careful about that. Okay. Second thing is the pervasive influence of Herod, which is pride and, oh, what's the word I can use that's PG? Salacious sexual behavior. They should watch out for that. Pleasure, pride and pleasure. They should be careful about that. Okay. Pharisees are plagued by disbelief. They don't believe that Jesus is who he says he is. So watch their pervasive influence, which exists today, that says we don't believe that this Jesus character is who he says he is. On the other hand, Herod's issue is pride and pleasure. Go ahead.
May I also ask and interject, asking in there, they didn't really want him, the Pharisees, to be who he said he was. They had originally
Why?
believed that he was from Satan. So they really did not want him to be who he was saying that he
Why?
said. Why? Because it would interfere with their agenda, with the things that they were doing
Yes.
as a group. It would interfere.
Yes. Because they have positioned themselves politically
Mm-hmm.
to align with the power structure.
Right.
And if Jesus is who he says he is and they have to do what Jesus says, they can't
Yeah.
follow the power structure anymore. Yeah. Thank you, sister. Thank you. All right. In this season of politics, it's important for us to keep that in mind. Question 7. What was the leaven of the Pharisees? We talked about that. It was what? Write this down. Their pervasive influence, doubting Jesus' identity. Okay. All right. Question number 8. The disciples have a discussion in verse 16. What does their discussion in verse 16 indicate or teach us about them?
Okay. I I indicated that they were discussing among themselves that they did not have any food, any bread. And I I continue to regress back to last week's lesson, i.e., although the disciples had witnessed many episodes of healing, miraculous healing, both physical and demonic, they were not processing the power that Jesus possessed as God's son. And
Mm,
somehow I think that they were not including themselves in the miracles and the things that they had seen him do as being them being part of that. They were still doing, and I wrote, they were still doing on the job training and required the repetition to gain who Jesus was as God's son and the power that he possessed as a result. I think that, and I said this last week, I think that we sometimes, because of the fact that we tend to forget, because they are biblical human beings, that that except for Jesus, they were mere human beings.
mm,
That's the
mm.
way I answered that.
All right. I like those answers, and I'm actually taking a few notes just in case we use this again.
They,
uh,
one, of, one of the
I
things
like.
that
Go ahead, sister.
arose from our group was that looking at a positive. that the disciples were at least having discussion amongst themselves. So they were demonstrating some team work there, or, that they had gelled as a team, or, were able to get along together as a team in order to even raise the question and discuss it amongst themselves, even though they were still wrong in their perception.
All right, that's a great insight that they at least were beginning to gel. They were beginning to form as a team. They could talk amongst themselves, and you're going to see more of that in next week's lesson. But they are misguided and they do misunderstand. Okay, all right. Um, question 9, Brother Murphy.
Uh, why does Jesus revolt with his disciples? For the lack of spiritual understanding. And when he fed the 5,000 and 4,000, they still didn't realize who he was. He was the Son of God.
All right, the lack of spiritual understanding. They're arguing about what? What are they arguing about? What are they discussing?
Only one loaf of bread.
One loaf
These,
of bread. It's 12 of us plus Jesus. We didn't have any bread. Okay.
and they didn't realize he could make more.
And they didn't realize he could make more.
And I think that, and I thought that they're not unlike us in that we often doubt what the Lord can do because we're looking through our physical eyes rather than our spiritual eyes, in
Mm,
order to fully understand and remember that if he's done it before, he can do it again.
absolutely. Absolutely.
He
We
also
need to have,
said, he also said, how many times do I have to really tell you?
mm, all right. All right. So when he fed the 5,000, how many baskets did they have left? And remember, these baskets are human size. You could hide a grown man in one of these baskets. How many of those do they have left?
12,
Well,
12 and
wasn't it?
12,
And how many did they have left when he fed the 4,000?
7?
12 and 7.
7. Okay. All right. Let's jump down to question number 10 then. What is the Lord teaching his disciples and us in this passage?
He teaching them that no matter what little you have, you can make it out into something big.
All right. That he could take the little and make something big. I like that. What else?
that
I
really
put
our relationship depends on what we believe and accept to be true, and that Jesus is the Christ.
All right. Our relationship with him is predicated upon the fact that we believe he really is the Christ. Write that down, saints. Okay. Sister Stovall and then Sister Foster. Sister Celia, go ahead. All right. Need you to unmute for us. All right. Sister Foster, go ahead. We'll come back to Sister Stovall.
Well, mine was kind of like Sister Hickman's. I wrote on there that it's extremely important that we should understand just who Jesus is, because without that perception, we can't enter into a proper relationship with him. And then when we're not doing that, then we're focusing more and looking at just the flesh and being fed, physically, and we're missing out on the spiritual feeding that he gives us.
All right. Sister Alicia, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
I believe that he was trying to teach them, and then more so teaching us today, if we would just trust him. If we would
Mm,
just trust him and not waver in our faith, he will continue to do what he has promised in his word.
all right. Wonderful. 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 Anybody else?
You gotta have faith of a mustard seed.
All right. Let's take that little bit of faith and put it in his hands. Okay. All right. Here's one of the things that directly impacted me. We're in this building process. We need our members to give generously toward the building fund and whatnot as we get ready to do it. In fact, we met with the contractor yesterday to examine the roof and what we need to do there. And one of the things that struck me is we need to trust God to supply us with what we need to give to get this done because he's going to make it happen. We just need to trust him. And then not only trust him, but trust him with what we'll give. And so um, um, the other thing that I thought about is that when we face situations in our own personal lives that are difficult, we shouldn't immediately revert to doubt, immediately go into panic, immediately kick into the worst case scenario. And sometimes Pastor Billy Bell taught us that fear is future events appearing real. We go to the worst thing it could be immediately instead of trusting God. And I think that you all have hit the nail on the head. The Lord wants us to trust him, to know that he's going to supply, that he's going to provide. Okay? All right. Well, listen, we're going to end our recording at this time. We thank God for all of you